know that feedback matters, but most of us avoid it. And not because we don't care, but because it feels risky. What if it lands wrong? What if it makes things worse? So instead, we delay, we sugarcoat, or we say nothing at all. But silence doesn't build trust, it slowly erodes it. Feedback isn't a leadership add on. We need to understand that it's core to any healthy culture, workplace, personal. It applies everywhere. When we withhold it from others, we create confusion. When we give it poorly, we create defensiveness and relational disconnectedness. When we avoid it altogether, we trade short-term comfort for long-term drift. That's why it's not just about giving feedback, it's about leading through it. And let me just say now, Don, before you say one word, I feel like my wife is going to listen to this podcast and say, thank God he's talking about this, because I struggle with this at home. Because I am guilty of choosing short-term comfort instead of entering into the necessary conversations that feel so risky. But what I've learned over the years, and primarily because of my wife, is that those conversations, though they feel risky, if we learn how to do them even half well, can actually lead to a greater sense of connectedness and partnership. And that's what makes them so difficult.
It's so true. And I'm often struck by what I like to call some upside down realities of life and leadership. And this is one of them, that actually entering into these difficult conversations, choosing to risk a hard conversation, actually will build more trust than what we think, that by avoiding it, we're actually creating more trust, because we're not happy. We're not going to make discomfort a reality, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And we've seen this, we've lived it. We have people all the time that say things like, it just feels easier to let it go. I am the queen of just let it go in my household. Just let it go. Or we hear leaders say things like, I don't want to discourage people on my team. But often letting things go doesn't create the grace, the environment of grace that we think we're creating. It actually creates a gap between us and our team, or us and our family. So help us understand, let's dig into this a little bit. Why do we struggle with this so much as leaders?
Yeah. Well, let me start here. First of all, we have, all of us, and I think our listeners can relate to this. We all have so many data points through our life of people who were trying to give us feedback in one way or another. And very often, because their methodologies or strategies of offering feedback were harmful or broke trust, or they didn't handle it well, we all have this kind of these data points of pain, of frustration, of relationships that grow further apart because one or both parties didn't know how to give or receive feedback. And so that's the conundrum that we all have to wrestle with, this upside down reality that you're talking about, that feedback is absolutely critical in any partnership, in order to grow, in order to understand each other better, in order to build greater trust, which all strengthens the partnership. However, if we don't learn the simple mechanisms of giving and receiving feedback well, then we will continue to experience those pain points. And then that leads to, for most of us, just avoiding it altogether. So let me throw out a couple more thoughts. First of all, feedback also exposes us on both sides, right? When we receive it, it can feel like judgment, hypercriticism. We feel like we're being called out, we're being condemned, we're being told we're not good enough. And when we give it, it can feel like a huge risk because, like you said earlier, we're afraid to hurt somebody's feelings, discourage them, that they're not going to receive what we have to share with them. It's going to become combative. But the real problem is actually deeper. It's a trust issue. And we talked about this in so many of our podcast episodes, that trust really is the currency of partnership. And so again, having these hard conversations, entering into these feedback loops, as we call them, is critical for that partnership to build trust. But how do you begin to trust a process that in the past has actually created quite a few pain points for us, right? So if we don't learn how to normalize healthy feedback, then every conversation feels like a confrontation. And here's the kicker: when feedback is absent and there are these narrative gaps, assumptions begin to grow. People start to create these stories in their minds, or we create stories in our minds about people's performance, about their intentions, about different dynamics and relationships. And very often, because most of us have kind of a natural negativity bias, we fill those stories and those gaps of understanding with a less favorable view of the other party. Right. And you've all experienced this. If anybody's been married longer than like 6 months, we've been in a significant relationship longer than 6 months, you know this,
Well,
right?
you and I have actually shared stories about how this has transpired in our own working relationship.
100%. With you, with Aura, with everybody on our team, at some point, right? There's a point of tension, and we're instead of jumping into the feedback loop to say, hey, let me share with you what I'm experiencing, what I'm seeing, let's process. Instead of doing that, we kind of fill those gaps in our minds, and very often it leads to these very negative, pejorative
They're
perspectives.
usually happy stories that we're filling our minds.
We're not normally like, oh, they're fine, they're great, I assume the best in them. No, that's not the norm, right? So here's a key point: when feedback isn't part of our culture, it is usually experienced as a threat.
Yeah.
Right. So if we don't normalize this feedback loop in our cultures, and I mean like workplace and in our personal relationships, then more often than not, we all experience it as something threatening. But when it's when we can make feedback a part of our normal rhythms of engagement, it actually creates an environment where people feel safe to be seen, for better and for worse, to grow and to develop.
I mean, honestly, I could dig into that concept for hours, but what I'm really curious about is, if that's the case, then how do we fight for making feedback a normal rhythm in our life? How do we make it a tool for, like you said, growth and development, instead of something that makes us feel awkward and defensive and judged?
Yeah. Well, one of the things we have to remember is that giving and receiving feedback is a skill. Right. We think, oh, some people are just better at it than others. No. We may have natural personalities or wirings or ways that we operate, or life experiences that lend to making it an easier skill to pick up. But the reality is, as leaders, creating regular feedback loops is a necessity. We have a tool in our toolkit, our operating system, called the leadership pipeline. And we know that we recruit people into our teams. By the way, as parents, you recruit your spouse into marriage, you recruit your children into your family. So recruiting is really just when we're bringing people into some form of partnership. And then there's a training process. Then we deploy those team members. We deploy our spouses as they go off to do work and do whatever they do. We deploy our children as they go to school, or as they're young adults, start to venture out into the world. We deploy them. What this tool does, it reminds us there's a fourth part of the pipeline that is critical but often overlooked. That's what we call the review process.
Yep.
How do we review on a regular basis with the people in our lives that give all of us the best opportunity of doing two things? Number one, identifying and celebrating what's working. And also, on the flip side, identifying and processing and learning from what's not working. And so feedback is more than just, hey, you're doing this wrong and you need to change it. Feedback is about providing the affirmation, the encouragement, the kudos, the attaboys that people need to reinforce good behavior, right? And who doesn't love a good attaboy or kudos, right? We love it. No matter how far we've gotten in our careers, we love it because that reinforces the more positive aspects of our attitudes and behaviors. But likewise, we need space, a safe space, where we can identify blind spots in our attitudes and behaviors, where we're dropping the ball, where we're falling short, where there are skills that we have yet to develop for whatever reason. And so I want our listeners to understand that's the purpose of feedback, is ultimately to create a safe place where we can learn and grow together.
Yes.
And so when it comes to feedback, there's a few things I want our listeners to understand, and I want to remind us, because we're always practicing this within our own organization, which is, the traditional methodology of feedback is this annual review that I sit down with somebody and I tell you what you did well and didn't do well. Maybe you get a raise or a bonus, but really anything that's said in that meeting doesn't move the needle.
No.
So we're not helping people grow and develop in those meetings. We might give them an encouragement attaboy, and that's great. We might help them identify some areas that they need to grow in, but that's not where growth happens, right? Growth is a process, not an event. An annual review is an event.
That's good. Wait, say that again.
Yeah. Growth requires process. It does not happen in an event.
Yeah.
It's no different than if you go to a conference and you're really stimulated and inspired by some of the things you learn from the conference, and everyone walks away going, "Oh yeah, I'm gonna integrate that into my life." But
Right.
without an intentional process in place, a pathway that allows us to begin to engage and practice whatever it is that we got excited about, the light bulb going off in our brain, then growth doesn't really happen. And so what we recommend to the leaders we work with and what we fight to practice is we fight to practice what we call a regular feedback loop. And because human beings are hardwired to learn and grow when they're receiving regular feedback, both positive and even challenging. Because, something that somebody challenged me on 6 months ago, I've forgotten about if I haven't reconnected on the conversation. It's what we call a feedback loop, right? So here's a few things, just practical handles. Number one, frequency matters. And so I tell people we need a weekly, bi-weekly, and at the longest, a monthly frequency of feedback loop. Those can be formal or informal. Formal is we have a meeting, sit down, hey, how you doing? What's going on? Let's talk process, how things are going, so that we can provide helpful feedback for one another. The organic version is, running into somebody at the water cooler, at the coffee machine, in the elevator, over coffee, over lunch, and just say, how are things going? I'm going to check in with you. I want us to review together how things are going. And again, I hope our listeners can hear, you can do this in your marriage. You can do this with your kids. You can do this with your team members. You can do this with your boss. You can do this with your peers, right? In any area of our life where we have partnerships that matter, a regular feedback loop is critical so that we are attending to those growth opportunities with enough regularity that we can actually have a chance at moving the needle. The second thing is people say, well, what do I do in these reviews or these feedback opportunities? Here's two simple questions. What's working or what's not working? We can ask that of the people on our teams, and we can also ask them to share that about our leadership. Hey, what about my leadership has really been helpful in this season? And is there anything that you think would be more helpful or I could do differently? Right? So it can go both ways because that's a partnership. It goes both ways. Even if the person you're doing the feedback loop with is somebody on your team, they're down chain. It could be one of your kids. But it's an opportunity for us as leaders to get the kind of feedback that we need so that we can continue to grow and become better leaders, right? So it goes both ways.
Yeah.
A third thing I would say is this is where coaching, training, and what we call in one of our tools, the Empower Matrix, this is where we get to calibrate, support, and challenge. What is the support that this individual needs from me? What is the challenge they need? By challenge, I mean, do I need to re-clarify expectations or hold them to a better standard? Is there a kind of accountability that this person needs from me? Right? Do I need to hold their feet to the fire of something they committed to? This is where we think about, pushing people outside of their comfort zone, but really what challenge is in its best form is calling people to a better version of themselves, right? And so in these feedback options, we get to learn how to provide support and challenge that gives people we know the best chance to feel safe and to fail forward, stumble forward, learn, grow, develop, all that stuff. Let me say a quick word about receiving feedback.
Ooh, okay.
Because this could be an episode all in and of its own.
Oh, yeah.
So far, we've kind of focused more on giving feedback. In receiving feedback, here are a few handles. Number one, we have to choose to see feedback as an opportunity to identify both what we're doing well and potential blind spots. Now, notice how I said potential. Just because somebody gives me a particular kind of feedback doesn't mean they're right, doesn't mean they're all right. They're completely right. Maybe there's a percentage of what they're sharing is right. But as somebody who's receiving feedback, here's my rule of thumb. If even 1% of what they're sharing has validity, then as a leader, I'm going to choose to take that 1% and I'm going to learn from it and I'm going to grow from it. And because I have received some of the absolute worst expressions of feedback through the years from people on my teams, people impacted by my leadership, and they want to come in and they're going to give me feedback. But really what they want to do is they want to rail against me.
Yeah.
And so I say, hey, I'm happy to hear your feedback. Tell me what you're thinking. And they just unleash a lot of frustration and anger and hostility, whatever. Okay, that's the worst case.
Yep.
And in my mind, here's what I'd choose to do. I'm not here to defend myself, protect myself. I'm not here to justify anything. I'm here because if I have an opportunity, if even 1% of what this individual is saying is something that I can benefit from, I'm going to take it. Another thing, when we receive feedback, if we're not sure what percentage of it should be helpful or is accurate, then I will go to somebody I trust and say, I received this feedback. Can you help me filter through it to determine what of it could be really helpful for me? Because again, I'm either going to get defensive, project blame, push them away, or as a leader, I'm going to seize every form of feedback as an opportunity to learn and to grow. And when we choose this posture, which people would put under the banner of humility and self-awareness, honesty, great. But it's really important to remember that, not all feedback is helpful, but if there's even a percentage of it that could be helpful, our job as leaders, our personal responsibility is to squeeze out those opportunities for learning and growth. And more often than not, when somebody gives me feedback in a terrible fashion, there's almost always at least 1% of what they're saying that I can take and say, you know what, I need to learn from this. And I double check it with somebody I trust to make sure I'm not, burying myself in somebody's criticism. So I think that's really, really, really helpful. But to go back to, let's not bring it back to the point and purpose of feedback is to create a safe environment where we get to help each other grow. If feedback is always one way, leaders, listen. If feedback is only ever one direction, you're only ever giving feedback to your team members, but you're never soliciting feedback. That creates a dynamic in which people will not feel safe. And so feedback is always meant to be a reciprocal experience where we build trust with each other, because ultimately what we're trying to do is enhance the partnership in these relationships of our life.
Yeah. Real quick, I'd love you to just give us some practical advice on how do we solicit feedback? If this isn't something that we are currently doing, if suddenly we're realizing, oh shoot, our feedback is really one-sided, how do we solicit feedback from our team in a way that?
Well, let's start with the fact that our team most likely will not feel comfortable in the beginning offering feedback because they don't want to feel critical of their boss or their leader or their parent or their spouse. So the way that I have found it most helpful is to ask a question like this. Hey, I'd love to hear from you where you feel like I'm doing well right now. Where do you feel like I'm doing well as a dad? Where do you feel like I'm doing well as a husband? Where do you feel like I'm doing well as a friend? Where do you feel like I'm doing well as a boss, a leader, a team leader? Where do you feel like I'm doing well as a coach? I solicit feedback all the time from my clients because I'm gonna get them starting by getting to affirm me, right? Because if they get to affirm me, then whatever they share afterward that may feel challenging is going to be easier for them most likely. So then the second question I ask is, what I'd love to now hear is, are there any areas where you feel like maybe I could do things a little bit better? You see how even the way that I'm asking that question, I don't say, hey, where do I suck? Where am I dropping the ball? Where am I a miserable boss? Where am I a miserable parent or husband? I'm giving them an opportunity. I'm couching it in really safe, gentle terms. hey, I'd love to hear from you. Is there anywhere where I can maybe do a little bit better? Just
Mhm.
a little bit better.
Yeah,
Right.
that's helpful. Thanks. Okay, let's transition just quickly into talking about some stories. I know we personally deal with this. We deal with this with our own team, with our clients. So, what's a story that stands out to you about the importance of feedback that we've been talking about?
Oh gosh, there's so many because in working with leaders over these many years in any context, we find that rarely is feedback a consistent, regular part of any culture that we operate in, right? I mean, our listeners right now are thinking, you want me to solicit feedback from my spouse, from my kids? Are you kidding me? You want me to open myself up to the barrage of criticism and anger and frustration that these people might experience? It's like, yeah, it's a risky endeavor. But again, let's just remind ourselves and our listeners that this isn't going to happen overnight. We're not going to change culture in one feedback experience. Sometimes those feedback, conversations are going to go a bit sideways, and we've got to fight to believe that, hey, if I just keep practicing this, we're going to get better. I'm going to get better at this until it really becomes a more normalized part of our engagement. But I remember this one in particular. This isn't me working with an executive in the NFL, and in one of our calls, they were really frustrated and complaining a lot about one of their team members. And I asked the simple question. I said, well, hey, I'm curious, as a leader, when any of our team members are underperforming, the first thing we have to ask is, hey, what's my part in this? So I said, so how are you partnering with this individual to help them raise their standard of performance? And they said, well, this is no joke. He said, well, their annual review's coming up. And so I've got a list of things that I'm going to share with them.
Oh,
Okay. Like, how long is this list? And
seriously.
like 30 things that this person was like, I need to let them know. Now, again, let's go back to what we said earlier. That annual review is for that team member is going to feel like they just got beat up,
Yeah, hit with a sledgehammer.
hit with a sledgehammer. And then I said, okay. And then when do you follow up after that annual review? Oh, well, I mean, you know, every once in a while, I'm sure we'll check in. Oh, hold on. We began the process of talking through the importance of creating a healthy feedback loop for their team members. And I'll be honest, in the beginning, his response was, Eric, first of all, I don't have time for that. Second of all, I don't want my team members to feel like I'm always coming down. I'm like, well, that's why the feedback loop includes, let me affirm where you're crushing it and where you're killing it and where your performance is at or above our standards. So, it's got to be both and, right? The positive and the, support and the challenge. And then the third thing is they said, well, my concern is that, we've hired these people, paying them all this money. We recruited them based on the fact that they should have what they need to be able to do this job. And I said, hey, the sooner that you recognize as a leader that one of your responsibilities is to partner with your team members in their growth and development. I said, do you not have to grow and develop? Is there a reason that you meet with me every single week with an executive coach
Yeah.
to help you celebrate where you're doing well and to identify your blind spots and to give you an opportunity? And then every week I deploy you and I say, go do your best. And then what do we do next week? We come back to our feedback loop and we process where you're doing well and where you're struggling. And that gives me as your coach an opportunity to identify, where can I coach? Where do you need more training? Where do you need more skill? Is that not what we're doing? And I remember the look on his face. He was like, oh my gosh. So if the highest level leaders in your organization greatly benefit from having this regular feedback loop in this coaching process, which by the way is a unique feature of our coaching methodology, just side note there, that we make sure it's very regular. And so that they can move the needle in their leadership. Don't you think your team deserves the same?
Yeah.
And I said, and so you can outsource that and you can pay me to go coach all your team members and provide that for them. But I think as a leader, you're going to wake up someday and realize that was probably something you needed to own. Transformed his paradigm. He said, Okay, I'm in. Let's do it. And so he scheduled these regular feedback loop
Mhm.
opportunities with his team. Some of them were weekly, some of them were biweekly, some of them were actually monthly based on his, relation to them in the organization. He did it. 6 months later, he said, Eric, it's unbelievable. He said, I'm not solving problems for these people. I'm not giving them all the answers, but just creating that intentional space for them to have an opportunity to reflect on what's going well, what's not going well. And for me to speak into those areas, he said, it's such a light lift. It's not a heavy lift. He said, I don't feel like I need to have a degree in psychology or be a counselor or therapist or a professional coach. And it was him learning what you and I talk about all the time, Don, that the best leaders are coaching leaders.
Yeah, that's right.
The skill set of great leadership is actually developing this core skills of great coaching, like, right? Because we need to coach ourselves and we need to be able to coach other people because that's the environment in which people grow. So rather than being wholly dependent on
Yeah.
bringing in a consulting or coaching group to do all that for an organization, if leaders can learn these simple skills, then they can actually now have the authority and the opportunity to reshape their culture into a culture that feels safe for people to be seen, to be heard, to be valued, to grow, to develop. And it's just unbelievable in the teams and organizations where we see this happen, even in the households where people are really taking this seriously. It's not without some bumps in the road, but it's amazing the transformation that we see in those cultures.
That that story made a connection in my brain that I've never made before, but now I can't unsee it.
Yeah.
So the way that bosses, because like that idea that leaders so often have that, well, I hired these people, they should know what I need, they should know how to do their job. Exactly the same energy that people early on in relationships are like, my partner should just know what I need.
So true. So true. Oh my gosh. Yes.
You and I have been married to our spouses for over 20 years now.
Yeah.
And I remember in early days building up all of these grievances,
Yeah.
stack of grievances, because why didn't he know what to get me for my birthday? Why didn't he know that I wanted flowers? Why didn't he know that I didn't want flowers? Why didn't he like fill in the blank? Why didn't he know that I don't like it when he does X, Y, and Z? Oh, because he can't read my mind.
That's right. That's right.
And that learning curve is something that every couple has to go through multiple times, but certainly from the infancy of a relationship to, a seasoned successful relationship, to be able to communicate regular feedback, let them know what's working, what's not working, what you like, what you don't like. And yet those same individuals, when we hire people onto our teams, we do the same exact thing. Why don't they just know what to do? Well, because you haven't communicated clearly how you want those things done, what's working, what's not working. Oh my gosh, that is too funny. I can't. Yeah, I remember very clearly the moment in our marriage where I was like, I am just always going to tell him exactly what I want for my birthday and for Christmas, because then guess what? I know I'm going to get what I want.
Yeah.
As opposed to saying nothing and putting all of this expectation on this moment, essentially setting him up for failure when he inevitably doesn't get me what I wanted. I'm like, this is dumb. Why am
Yeah.
I doing this? And yet we do the same thing in our professional relationships.
100%. Well, here's the irony. I was just, as you're sharing that, I'm thinking back to this, and I did say this to this particular client. I said, the irony is you're involved in a professional sports organization where your team spends more time practicing than playing a game. And what is that practice all about? It's about running plays and developing the skills and working out and increasing your fitness. And all of it is under the supervision of coaches, right? Whether it's the head coach or, other sundry coaches that are part of the program, or the performance staff, in terms of their health and fitness, whether it's, like, it's like And we expect those athletes
to subject themselves
to regular feedback loops, sometimes on a moment by moment basis. Run a play. Okay, let's talk about why that didn't work. And you ran this route and you didn't do this and you did this and you didn't make this block and you didn't see this pass and whatever it is. Like we require that they subject themselves to that feedback so that so they can grow and develop and become a greater asset to the team.
Right.
And yet when we work with leaders, they're almost shocked at the prospect that they should subject those same process either with us as a professional coaching group, or that they should create that same environment within their own teams, whether it's in the front office or business side or whatever it is. And so again, I'm hoping our listeners hear what we're saying in that this is not something that we've mastered, that we don't struggle with. I mean, I still am constantly challenged to step into these feedback loops with my spouse, with my kids, right? Because there's nothing, it sucks when my wife has to share with me, hey, this is where I feel like maybe you could do a little bit better this week. And I'm like, oh, man, that means that maybe I wasn't doing a great job, or and you can go into that whole like self-condemnation, or then you become defensive, whatever the case is. But just remembering, like, we want to create opportunities for growth. We want to see each other become a better version of ourselves. We want to become more of an asset to whatever the environment is that we're in. But I'd have to say it more for myself than anything else, because I am as resistant to feedback. I struggle with it as much as anybody else. I've learned the value of it. So it makes it easier to press into the discomfort of it. And yet we have to constantly remind ourselves that the purpose of feedback, or these feedback loops, is to create a safe environment where growth can happen. Because if we do not, then what happens is we get frustrated and we're confused as to why we've plateaued in our professional careers, in our relationships, and we feel stuck, and we're like, why is this world not working out? And then you have to take a look in the mirror and be like, oh yeah, it's probably because I can't be responsible for them, receiving feedback and doing something with it. But what I can do is commit myself to a lifestyle of soliciting, processing, reflecting on, and growing and learning from that feedback.
That's right. And that's the shift that we can make as leaders, is when we create these rhythms of short feedback loops, it becomes less about correction, becomes less about whacking somebody with a sledgehammer. And it becomes more about these small moments of connection, of honesty, of realignment in almost real time. And that's where the transformation happens.
Yeah, I love that.
So give us some practical steps. What do we do if we're listening to this episode going, oh gosh, okay, I have some work that I need to do here? How do we start to create these rhythms and readjust our relationship with feedback?
I love the way you just put that. How do we adjust our relationship with feedback? That's really powerful. First of all, just rewind to the beginning of this episode and listen to it all over again. That's the first step, because I think you just nailed it. Like, part of it is really embracing a paradigm shift as it relates to our engagement with feedback, our understanding of it, our relationship to it. I think that's absolutely wonderfully said. For our listeners, just a couple of thoughts. How do we begin to practice this today? And I would recommend two things, two sides of the same coin. One is to identify one or two people in our lives where we have some responsibility in partnering them in their growth and development. Could be our spouse, significant other, kid, an extended family member. It could be a friend. It could be, but somebody who has welcomed us to play some kind of role in their life, a team member, and to say, hey, I would love to schedule a regular feedback loop with you where we can create a safe space and to help each other identify where we're doing well, where we could do better, and help each other grow, partner in that. That's one thing. And so just identify one or two people that we want to do that with, just to practice it and to develop our confidence in these skills. That here's the other one, is to identify one or two people for whom you're going to regularly solicit feedback and say, hey, I'd love to schedule some kind of regular connecting point with you where I get to hear from you where you feel like I'm doing well and where you think I could be doing better,
Mhm.
which gives us a time, a space where we get to practice receiving feedback, where we get to practice the humility of I'm going to hear what this person says. I'm not going to be defensive. I'm not going to be protective. I'm not going to disagree. I'm not going to justify. I'm just going to hear what they share. And I'm going to sift through that for that percent of what could be helpful for me to learn and grow from. And I think if we just do these two things, we'll start to develop our confidence. It will transform our relationship to feedback. And I think that will catalyze a fresh inspiration, excitement, and clarity around how do we integrate this now into other parts of our lives.
Yeah. And I hope that our listeners are picking up on this idea that feedback isn't really an optional part of our leadership. It is, if we want to be leaders worth following, we have got to develop this feedback skill, because it's not only about creating alignment, but it is about building trust, which, as we have said time and time again, is the currency that we trade for good partnerships.
Yeah. I love that.
And when we make this feedback normal, we make it feel safe.
I love that. I love that. Thanks for being with us today. We love our listeners. We're so appreciative for all the feedback that you've been offering us. I found out the other day, couldn't believe it. We had 299 5-star reviews on Spotify. And that's just so encouraging to us. We want to serve you in your leadership journey. We want to help you become a better version of yourself and to unlock more of your potential. If this episode sparked something for you, please share it with someone who you think may benefit from it. Maybe share it with a person that you want to engage in a feedback loop with so that they can hear this and process that and enter into that with you. And next week, we're going to be talking about the cost of inconsistency in our leadership. Oh my gosh. I will have tons of personal stories to share about the inconsistencies that I've had to battle through in my own leadership and how those inconsistencies erode trust and partnership. We'll see you next time.